outside the 10. Carr tips it in and it's Wall. He spins into the end zone for the touchdown. Watching greatness on one end in LeBron. There's a dude with 35 in white getting it done defensively and then offense taking over the fight. Mama, there goes that man.
They have shared a brilliant championship battle, but the championship can only be won by one, and it's going Dutch in 2021. Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another thrilling edition of the Waterboy Experience. My name is Jason Shaddix, and unfortunately, Davis McLemore couldn't be here for this recording. He had to attend to some personal issues, so instead he gave the reins to me. And I have no second string quarterback because, unfortunately, I'm doing this last minute, so I'm by myself. So God help us all. Before we get started, I want to talk about last week's episode, or the episode that we missed. We had recorded an episode virtually, and unfortunately, when transferring one of the files to me, it was lost, and we can't find it. So we couldn't post anything, and we were just too lazy to re-record everything. So yeah, that happened. But let's get started. Tonight, I will be talking about Formula One. We had the U.S. Grand Prix last Sunday. And I'm going to talk about some NFL reports that have been coming out about players getting injured. And I will also be talking about the bets and, who won last week's bet that didn't come out. And then Davis and I had talked earlier today and we had come up with the bets for week 8. So that's pretty much what we're going to do today. Now, to start off the podcast, I want to talk about the death of Dietrich Mateschitz. To many of you, you might have never heard that name, but if you've been a fan of Red Bull and Formula One, then you have definitely heard that name in the past. Mateschitz is the man responsible for taking an energy drink in Thailand and making it into the biggest energy drink company in the world, spawning countless copycats. None could compete with Red Bull, due in part because of their unique way of marketing. Today, it's normal to see Red Bull stickers on any kind of sports, but back in 1989, they had just begun by signing Austrian F1 legend Gerhard Berger. From here, the Red Bull sticker would begin to appear in other sports such as windsurfing and hang gliding. With their popularity increasing dramatically every year, this gave Mateschitz the opportunity to do something that at the time seemed to be very foolish. In late 2004, after years of sponsoring many drivers and teams in Formula One, Mateschitz bought the Jaguar F1 team from Ford and rebranded it Red Bull Racing. With this came a change to the Formula One atmosphere as the team brought with them the same party attitude that they always had and had actually helped in a way to modernize many teams. In 2005, Mateschitz bought the team Minardi and renamed it Toro Rosso. 3 years later, the first win for Red Bull would come by the hands of a young German driver by the name of Sebastian Vettel, who won the Italian GP in the sister team. At the time, many felt that he was too young, but Mateschitz and Helmut Marko believed in Vettel and promoted him to Red Bull Racing for the 2009 season. And in 2010, their decisions paid dividends, with Vettel winning 4 years in a row both the driver and constructors championship. He is the youngest driver to do so. Unfortunately for the grid, the 2014 season marked the introduction of the hybrid era and the dominance of Mercedes. Not giving up hope on another win, Mateschitz brought many drivers to the grid such as Daniel Ricciardo, Pierre Gasly, Carlos Sainz, and Alex Albon to name a few. But it was Max Verstappen for whom Red Bull placed their bets on. Being the youngest driver in Formula One, Verstappen began to show the world what Marko and Mateschitz saw in the young Dutchman. Though he made many mistakes in his early years, they stuck with him, and in 2021, Max Verstappen clinched a world title from Lewis Hamilton, and this year he won his second world championship in Japan. Unfortunately, Mateschitz could not see his team win the Constructors' Championship as he died on Saturday from a lengthy battle with cancer. His loss will be felt heavily across all sports, but his influence will not be forgotten as Formula One appears to have entered another Red Bull dominance. So, yeah, it's very unfortunate that he died. He was 78 years old, and he was one of the big reasons behind a lot of drivers getting a chance in Formula One. So, it's sad to hear of his passing, and like I said, He died on Saturday, and on Sunday, his team won the Constructors' Championship. We're going to move along, and we're going to talk about Audi, who has confirmed that they will partner up with Sauber for the 2026 season as a works team. The engines will be built in Audi's headquarters in Nuremberg, Germany, and the rest of the car will be built at Sauber's headquarters in Switzerland. As we reported a few episodes ago, Audi expects to be competing for wins within 3 years, so it will be very interesting to see if Sauber has the ability to follow up on this. Like, they're not a great team, they're a decent team, and they've had some success, but in mid-2010s, they suffered financial problems, and they just kept on falling back and back. But it would be very nice to see the team win races and possibly compete for world championships. We're going to move on to talk about the attendance for this past race. So they raced at the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, and they actually had 444,000 people attend the event over the weekend. And they actually expect that they will break that record and have 500,000 people attend next year. This weekend also marked the end of the race steward rotation, and it's been such a mess with these new racing stewards. They alternated between races, and it was just inconsistent at best. And all I gotta say is, Michael Massey, we need you back, because these guys don't know what they're doing. I mean, Michael wasn't the greatest, but the amount of fuck-ups we've seen this season is just fucking ridiculous. Also, F1 has announced that they will expand their deal with ESPN for the next 3 years. So if you want to watch it in America, you can watch it on ESPN. I don't think they're showing it on ESPN Plus. Like, you actually have to have cable or satellite in order to watch it, which sucks. But you can also watch it on F1 Pro TV, and I kind of enjoyed more on there than ESPN. Also, I think the week prior, we had talked about the W Series going out of business, and they canceled the last few races. Well, F1 has announced that next year they will begin an all-female racing league that will run as a support league to Formula 3. And while we don't know what kind of machinery they will run, it is rumored to be Formula 4 cars. The program aims to have girls of around 16 years of age to participate, and they did mention that if the W Series comes back next year, which is doubtful, they will run alongside the new series. So that's kind of interesting for me that they didn't just put more money into the W Series to be like, all right, we're going to continue with the WC Series. Instead, they're like, well, we're going to make our own thing. So that's very interesting to me. This weekend, we also saw confirmation of one of the vacant seats being taken up, possibly. So Williams confirmed that F2 driver Logan Sargent will get Latifi's seat if he can finish 6th or higher in the Formula 2 race in Abu Dhabi. That's in order for him to get the remaining points to get his super license. So in Formula 1, you have to have competed in this many races, and then they have to be races that the FIA can qualify as races that essentially show your maturity and show that you can understand driving and a high competition and all that. So once you do that, you get your super license, and then you can race in Formula 1. So let's get started with the race. During FP1, we saw 2021 IndyCar champion Alex Palou take out the McLaren for a test run. Antonio Giovinazzi also took out the Haas of Kevin Magnussen, only to crash it after 4 laps. So pretty much Antonio has sealed his fate. He's not coming back to Formula 1. He had a pretty bad run with Alfa Romeo for 2020 and 2021, so him crashing the car is definitely not a good sign. Alex Palou, if you remember, we talked about him and the whole debacle with Chip Ganassi Racing, and then him going to McLaren, and then them suing him, and it just became this huge battle that eventually was decided that Alex would stay with Chip Ganassi, but they would allow him to do F1 test runs during free practice, so that's pretty good. In FP2, the entire grid weren't actually running to, test out like setups for the cars, for the race and all that. Instead, they were testing out the new tires for 2023, and the teams actually didn't know what tires they had. Obviously, the drivers could tell, well, this is a hard compound or this is a soft compound. I've got more grip, I got less grip, but it was just the purpose for Pirelli to get the best data out of the tires. So it'll be interesting if some of the teams take the data that they also gathered and are able to work it into next year's car. Moving on to qualifying, Carlos Sainz actually beat out both Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen for pole position. Checo Perez, who came in P4, I want to say, ended up changing parts for his engine and received a 5 grid penalty, and Charles took a 10-place grid penalty. So to me, something that's very interesting is that Checo took the engine penalty in the US. Obviously, they're not fighting for the World Championship, and the Constructors' Championship was going to be sealed regardless. But I think that Red Bull is trying to give Checo the best possible chance to win the next Grand Prix, which is in Mexico, his home country. So hopefully, Davis and I get the yell, "Vamos, Checo." Now, before we start the race itself, I do want to mention something that's been on my mind lately. So this year we had the Miami Grand Prix, and next year we're getting the Las Vegas Grand Prix. And a lot of fans have been kind of like, we don't really want to watch these American races because the circuits look shit and all that. And it's just F1 is going for this America-centric thing. Obviously, it's run by Liberty Media, who is an American company. But I kind of feel the same thing. Like, I enjoy watching the races in America, or technically in this side of the continent, because I don't have to get up really early to watch those, because for the Japanese Grand Prix, I was up at midnight watching that, and obviously they suspended the race due to heavy rain, and then, the cars ended up crashing, so, they got to racing at 3 in the morning, and I wasn't empowered to watch a race at 3 in the morning. So I do enjoy it when they're in America or Canada or Mexico or Brazil. They're fun tracks for me to watch and all that. But one thing that I kind of been thinking about is I didn't really enjoy the Miami Grand Prix. I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was anything special. It was definitely a letdown. And just the way the new Grand Prix circuits have been, I think that the Las Vegas Grand Prix won't be anything to write home about, which kind of sucks. But the Circuit of the Americas, hopefully F1 notices that in COTA, it's such a wonderful race. I had so much fun watching this year and last year's Grand Prix, and I'm like, this is what I want in an American race. I just want high speed, lots of overtakes and all that. And that's something you can't get with these street circuits because they're so cramped up. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, if you want to watch the highlights, which I definitely recommend for this race, you'll notice that if you compare it to Miami, this is so much better. But anyway, that's enough of my little tangent. Let's go on to the race itself. So the cars line up and they're ready to go. Lights go green and Verstappen gets ahead of Carlos into turn 1. That's not surprising if you've been keeping up with these reviews. But here's what happened. George Russell torpedoes Carlos Sainz into the first corner, and that's it for Carlos. His gearbox was damaged and he limped the car home into the pits and he just had to retire, which, God, Ferrari just can't catch a fucking break. Carlos can't catch a fucking break. I mean, God, how many races has Carlos not even finished this season? It's ridiculous. Either he spins out into the gravel, he crashes, the engine fails him, or somebody just simply just torpedoes him. And I'm just thinking, fuck. Ferrari had a really good car at the beginning of the season, and now it's just fucking ridiculous. But anyway, moving on, Russell says that Sainz crossed into his path, and everybody thought that was bullshit. And Russell got a 5-second penalty, which I think was too light. I think he should have gotten a 10-second time penalty because he ruined Carlos's race. And I mean, come on, if you saw the way he went up the hill, there's no fucking way when he was turning that Russell could have made that fucking turn without hitting somebody. So I think that was immature of Russell, and people are not happy with him. Recently, his actions and the way he's kind of been holding himself up and talking over the radio has really turned a lot of people against him, which is a shame because he was a big underdog in Williams. And now that he's in a Mercedes, he's like, well, it's my line. You got to move out the way for me. And it's like, no, dude, we're all racing here. I mean, it could be a shitbox Haas that's in your way, but you still have to race them. If you're really fast like Verstappen, you can overtake him without an issue. Anyway, here's an interesting thing. Lance Stroll got his Aston Martin up to P3 for a little bit. And then on lap 6, Sergio Perez loses his front right end wing plate. And he races the rest of the race without changing his front wing. So he was at a bit of a disadvantage the entire race, especially later on when he was fighting Charles. He just didn't have enough downforce, but I think kind of made up for it in the straights because he had less drag to worry about. Hamilton, surprisingly, is behind Max Verstappen, and they pit him early on in order to keep him in the podium fight. On lap 18, Valtteri Bottas loses the rear of his Alfa Romeo due to a gust of wind on turn 18, funny enough, and a safety car comes out. Leclerc gets lucky and pits immediately, and when you normally pit, you lose around 20 seconds, and during a safety car, because everybody's running at reduced speed, you lose less time. So Charles got really lucky and he changed his tires, and during qualifying he got P2, but due to the engine change he had a 10 place penalty, so he was 12th, and that really helped him get a little bit higher up and get fresher tires. So on lap 22, the safety car comes in, but halfway through the lap, once the race got started, during the straight, Fernando Alonso was right behind Lance Stroll, and he was going to pass him. Like, that Alpine is so much faster than that Aston Martin. But Lance Stroll, in a moment of fucking genius, weaves to the left just as Alonso was coming through, and he hit Alonso's car. Now, here's the interesting thing. Alonso's car hits the back wheel of Stroll's car, and he goes flying up into the air, slams down, and then skids, and it hits the barricade, but he doesn't stop. He keeps on racing because for some reason he managed to keep the car from completely crashing in, and he only suffers some minor damage. Lance Stroll, on the other hand, his race was ruined, and his rear tires were coming off the rims, and it was just a disaster, and he got a 3-place grid penalty for next race because that was such an idiotic move to do that. But when they asked Fernando about it later, he was like, oh, it was just a racing incident. Funny enough, Lance Stroll is going to be his teammate next year, and his father, Lawrence Stroll, owns Aston Martin. So, yeah. Anyway, the safety car comes out, obviously, and the race doesn't restart till lap 26. On lap 36, Max Verstappen pits and suffers a really bad pit stop. The front left just would not tighten, and he lost about 17 seconds, I believe, and he came out P6 right behind Lewis Hamilton. On lap 39, Sebastian Vettel is actually leading the race, but it only lasts a few laps as Hamilton passes him and then Verstappen. When Aston Martin pits Vettel, they mess up his pit stop and he ends up coming out in P13. Like, if everything would have been right and they just quickly changed his tires, he would have come out around P6 and he would have scored a shit ton of points. And they desperately need those points, but they fucked it up. While this was happening, Nicholas Latifi forces Mick Schumacher off the track and he gets a 5-second time penalty, which, I mean, it's kind of useless for Latifi. He's always the slowest driver. He's not talented, and you give him a 5-second penalty? That's like throwing water on water and expect something to happen. Anyway, on lap 48, Fernando Alonso's right wing mirror was hanging off, and it actually fell off as he overtook Kevin Magnussen. And this led to a big controversy. So if you've listened to the past reviews or watched the past races, you know that Kevin Magnussen has a very unlucky history with his front wing end plate. Essentially, at the beginning of the race, he always makes contact with somebody and that thing is always hanging off. Now, they gave him, like, quite ridiculously, every time they give him a black and orange flag, which means you have to come into the pits and you have to change the front wing, because if that end plate comes off, it's going to hit somebody and it's going to be a big problem, and yada, 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 safety, safety, safety. Well, that doesn't happen to Fernando Alonso. His front wing mirror is just flapping in the wind, and then finally it snaps and it falls off. At no point did the race steward give him a black and orange flag, and he just kept on racing. He ended up finishing P7, and after the race, Haas was furious, and they went up to the racing steward and they said essentially, hey, that's not fair. We get a black and orange flag every time. He didn't get jack shit. So the race steward says that, you know what, you're right. So I am going to put into the race results, the official race results, that Fernando Alonso was given a black and orange flag when he wasn't given a black and orange flag, and he didn't come in and have that repaired or changed or taken out. So he's going to get a grid penalty, and he lost a bunch of points. And obviously Alpine and Fernando Alonso are fucking pissed because it's like, dude, how can you give me a black and orange flag for a race that already happened and you never gave me the black and orange flag, and now you're saying that you gave me the black and orange flag? This year, the FIA and the race stewards are just so fucking ridiculous. It's such a pain. But anyway, an interesting thing. So during this race, especially during the latter half, after Verstappen's awful pit stop, it looked like Lewis Hamilton was going to get that race when he so desperately needs. Since his debut in 2007, Lewis Hamilton has won at least one race each season. This might be the one season where he doesn't win a race because he was very close to winning the race. And unfortunately, the problem was Max Verstappen's car was so much better than his, and he just overtook him. Now, the way he overtook him is quite funny because Verstappen fights Lewis going into one of the corners, and then he comes out and he goes over the white line. All four wheels went off the white line, and he gets a black and white flag. So that means that you cannot go over the track limit again, otherwise you're going to get penalized. It's kind of like baseball. 3 strikes and you're out. Same thing with this. And once they told Hamilton, he was going on the radio and saying, Max went over the limit on turn 9, on turn 20, and then Lewis Hamilton, paying so much attention to Max Verstappen, didn't notice that he himself was going over the white line, and the racing stewards gave him a black and white flag for exceeding track limits. He was kind of like that meme of Recess where the little kid's tattletelling and he's writing on his notes. That was Lewis Hamilton. Everybody made fun of him for that, and it was just so stupid of him to do that. Anyway, Max Verstappen wins the United States Grand Prix. No surprise there. He secures the Constructors' Championship for Red Bull Racing, and Hamilton ends up being P2. Charles Leclerc made a great comeback and ended up being P3. Checo Perez, P4, had a damage with the front wing, so he couldn't fight Charles, but they did have quite a nice fight. Fortunately, Charles had a little bit more downforce. Now, as the fireworks were going off, Sebastian Vettel and Kevin Magnussen were fighting like crazy for P8. And in those last few corners, we saw the Sebastian Vettel that everybody knew when he was fighting for wins and world championship. And a lot of people said, no, it's kind of sad that Seb right now is having a tremendous race. Maybe not the greatest seasons he's ever had, but it's going to be sad to lose such a talented world champion. And yeah, I mean, it is. It was really exciting. Just the fireworks were going off, and yet you still had that tight race, and it's a shame. So that's the Formula One Grand Prix in the United States. Next week is the race in Mexico City, and I am very much hoping that Checo Perez can secure a win. He'll be the first Mexican driver to win in his home country, I believe, and if he does that, babies will be thrown in the air. People will be celebrating up and down. It's going to be a tremendous day. And I know for a fact that Checo is looking forward to that. And now that they don't have to worry about the World Championship or the Constructors' Championship, I think the gloves are going to completely come off and Checo is going to have the race of his life. Hopefully. All right, so let's move on to a little bit of the NFL. Now, I'm not going to cover the games themselves because I'm still learning football, and Davis is the one who knows all the stats, knows what they mean. If I even try, I'm going to sound like an idiot. But I do want to talk about some of the news that has come out the last few days about injuries and a few trades. So the Chiefs defensive end, Frank Clark, has been suspended for 2 games for violating the player's personal conduct policy after he was arrested for doing something. That sucks, but he got arrested, I think, in March or June, and you got to pay the price. This week, the Titans might be starting Malik Willis as Ryan Tannehill, something like that. Their starting quarterback injured his ankle against the Colts this past weekend. Jets running back Breece Hall ripped his ACL and is out for the rest of the season. And their offensive lineman Elijah Vera Tucker is out for the season after ripping his tricep. So that really sucks because the New York Jets have been having a tremendous season this year, and hopefully this doesn't affect them. Christian McCaffrey, and this is a big news, was traded from the Carolina Panthers to the 49ers this past Thursday. So that's really interesting because he's one of their best players and they just got rid of him. So it's not looking good for the Panthers. This has been such an awful season for them, and it's probably going to get worse. Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf hurt his patellar tendon. Not bad enough to require surgery, but as of now, there's no timetable on when he will return. Unfortunately, their opponents, the Chargers, cornerback J.C. Jackson did rupture his patellar tendon, and he is out for the rest of the season. That's just a nasty injury. Chargers wide receiver Mike Williams sprained his ankle and will be out for a few games, and this one just hurts. The Lions wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown suffered a bad hit and was put under the concussion protocol. Dan Campbell says there's no concussion, but with the new protocols, he has to be evaluated before the next game. So hopefully our boy isn't out too long. I mean, we can't afford to have anyone get hurt. I mean, God, we're having an awful season this year. It's fucking ridiculous, I'm telling you. Anyway, let's move on to the bets. For week 7 last week, I had 4 games right, which was Browns losing to the Ravens, the Jets beating the Broncos, and the Chiefs beating the 49ers, and Dolphins over Steelers. Thank God Tua was back, by the way. Davis, on the other hand, he only had 2 victories, Giants beating the Jaguars, and the Texans losing to the Raiders. So our overall score is 26 me, Davis 23. And we talked about the games that we wanted to pick for today, so I'm going to give it to you. I have the Dolphins beating the Lions, which if we somehow, I'm not saying it's going to happen, it's not going to happen, but if we beat the Dolphins, wouldn't that be something? The Raiders losing to the Saints, and that was just to spite Davis. The Eagles are going to beat the Steelers, the Giants are going to beat the Seahawks, and the Bills are going to beat the Packers. Now, this is what Davis voted for. He's got the Ravens beating the Buccaneers, which, judging how they've been playing the last few weeks, I definitely believe that. He's got the Panthers going over the Falcons. I was very surprised by that pick. He's got the Vikings over the Cardinals. He's got the Cowboys going over the Bears. He's got my Jets beating the Patriots. And he's got the Commanders going over the Colts, who are starting their second string quarterback because Matt Ryan isn't cutting it. So he's probably on his way out from the NFL because he's been having a really awful season this year. But anyway, that was our bets for week 8. Anyway, we'd like to thank you for listening to the Waterboy Experience. And I know Davis wants me to do this, so here he goes. He knows that he's been saying it for a while, but the Waterboy Experience is coming on YouTube, so he says. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like we'll be able to get the first episode of Cold Case Cafe out on October 31st. So unfortunately, if you were looking forward to that, we're going to push it back a little bit. I'm not sure when we're going to do that episode, but just look forward to it in the future. But I do want to promote my podcast, the Shattered Minds podcast. Trailer is out right now. The first episode is going to debut on January 1st of next year. So I'm looking forward to it. If you have been a long-time listener to our projects, then you might have heard the first iteration of the Shattered Minds podcast. And let me tell you, Davis and I did not know how to do a podcast. We still don't know how to do a podcast right now. We're learning as we go, but it is definitely better than that shit show that we did. It was awful. Like, I still have the pilot episode, not the one that ended up going live, but we did a pilot and it was just so awful. But this one is different. It's better. It's more research. We know how to edit more, and we're getting new microphones, which will help with the sound quality. So look forward to that. Anyway, I think that's it. I think that's all the shameless self-promoting. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Waterboy Experience. And peace.
Second and goal just outside the 10.